as you know, Connor, my kind of channel and interest is in mythology and fantasy stories as well. Lord of the Rings is the thing that brought us together, I think, and
Well,
many of us in this sphere.
even though
And
Star Wars was actually the first time I was on your channel.
oh, right, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. But yeah, I love the Lord of the Rings, and I think it's become a very strong influence upon my way of understanding the world. And in part, that's led me to kind of explore the Saxon and the Norse stories, the tales of Ragnarok, for example. This idea that we're in a declining age, which is going to come to an end, that things don't always get better. That's brought into the Lord of the Rings with a Christian twist. But the thing that I wanted to that was I was wrestling with for a while was, are these stories the right stories for now? Because many of us are writing stories which are inspired by Tolkien. There are other fantasy writers who have kind of rejected that line. I would say someone like George R. R. Martin or Michael Moorcock. That's a much more nihilistic world, but that's not the impression I get of the guys writing in our kind of community online. They tend to be more in that Tolkien track, let's say, with changes. It's not a copy, but it's kind of that world and those values. But it seems to me that Tolkien, this sort of idea of heroic Saxon men of Rohan, men of Gondor, let's say, making a final stand against overwhelming odds, which is really Ragnarok for men. This is a kind of autumnal story because there's still something to fight for. There's still something good that can be defended and maintained. And the defeat, which doesn't happen in Tolkien but does in the Norse mythology, that is then the beginning of winter. And the kinds of hero then that you're going to have are guardian types of heroes. They're not ones who are actively creating a new society or kingdom or something like that. They're not a Clovis, for example, forging the what's going to become the Carolingian Empire, right? It's not Alfred the Great forging England out of the ashes of the Saxon realms. It's not Julius Caesar. Rather, it's men holding the line against wave and wave of attack of the monsters. So that's that kind of society. Maybe like Batman is a similar sort of character. The superhero is a similar character. He guards the current order and tries to maintain it even while it's crumbling. And somewhere like Gotham is crumbling, right? It's almost there's nothing to defend, and yet Batman keeps defending it.
It's kind of illogical in some ways, because if if you're going through basically 70 years of the same situation, is it really worth it?
Well, that's precisely my question, right? Aragorn, Gandalf, and co. They have something that's worth defending. I think everyone would accept that Gondor and Rohan are worth defending. The Shire is worth fighting for. Is Gotham worth fighting for? Or if it is, let me rephrase that. Is it worth fighting for as it currently is?
It's a very it's such a weird situation, because in some ways they're just not providing the cure. Batman is truly just staving off the apocalypse.
And what's interesting in those films, and I think you see it in others, and King Emperor Penguin wrote a very good article about this, is that it's only the villains who are allowed to propose significant change. So it's somebody like Bane who's going to open all of the prisons and give Gotham to the people, right? Something anarchic and like that. So it automatically villainizes anyone who suggests the radical change that is actually required. I'm not saying what Bane is the cure, but whatever it is, it's not just carrying on. The same is also true in Star Wars, right? It's the Jedi and co just maintain, while it's Sidious or Palpatine is the only one who's kind of bringing decisive action and change. Now, you might disagree with what he's going to do in forging an empire, but he's the only one who's kind of allowed within that world to offer a decisive sort of alternative. And so it's the film implicitly kind of villainizes anyone who would make those sorts of suggestions. So it becomes it's kind of, that's the only place you can have that opinion within those stories. But then so I'm getting to why I asked that question then, and I think maybe you'll be able to see where I'm going with this. These stories are good for a previous time potentially, especially the Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And I'm not saying it doesn't speak to us now, but in terms of writing new stories or writing, trying to contribute to that tradition and speak to us today, if we write that kind of tale, does it feel a little bit like writing as if we're Batman defending Gotham? Is that the kind of archetype we're actually proposing there? As opposed to maybe we need to start thinking about a different kind of hero, the hero that in the winter establishes the new kingdom, the hero who actually brings the cure to Gotham, for example. That's kind of an open question that I don't know the answer to, but it was these sorts of things that were in my mind when I asked that question, and have been trying to wrestle with it ever since, really. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah, well, you bring up sort of the fact that the villains are only the ones proposing basically changes or possible solutions to the problem of society. And do you think that's really just because the authors of those stories have no answers to they only see things as sort of anything that's an attack on the current paradigm is an evil because they have no solutions and they basically have no real imagination for those solutions?
I think, well, I think it's two things there. I think on the one hand that you're right that that's a big part of it, that they don't have the imagination of what could be a solution. But it's also bound up with the idea that although someone like or it's also bound up with the idea that modernity and liberal democracy as it is today, while there are many problems with it, is still the best system, and these people buy that system so anything against that, anything that challenges that, is automatically like demonic, right? So I think that's a big part of it, that it's so ingrained, that mentality, that it can only be a villain who would challenge such a thing, even though it evidently doesn't work, and their own stories convey that it's not working. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that's why they could not tell or either George Lucas or Disney could not tell the sequel trilogy in in the manner that I would say fans like myself, at least I would say when I was a fan, it's hard for me to say that I'm necessarily a fan of Star Wars anymore. At least I'm a fan of the concepts and stuff like that, but I'm not necessarily a fan of what it is anymore, because what you're expecting after the destruction of the Death Star and the sort of downfall of the Emperor is a creation of a better world, of some society in the galaxy that is of higher quality. And it seems to me that their interpretation is almost that that if you think about like the original trilogy as like World War II, the the sequel trilogy is kind of representative of what they think today is. Today is like, we restored the Republic, but it's faltered, and there is a new enemy arising, out of the ashes of the empire. And let's just say the modern villains are either Russia or China, let's just say that, and they're sort of the remnants of the destruction of the former evils that were fought previously. Like,
Yeah, and
they can't fathom a successful society that doesn't bring about those evils again.
which makes you question, the why those societies bring those evils about, but they don't seem to reflect on that. I mean, to me, I was thinking about this earlier. A really great example of this sort of phenomenon is the Matrix trilogy. I haven't watched the fourth one, so I have no idea if that changes everything or not. But let's just take the original three. What is the alternative to being plugged into the Matrix? It's basically just like modern liberal democracy with raves. Like, is it any different from our society, really? Like, not really. It's just the same thing. They want the Matrix without the robots in control.